The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the M24 sniper rifle. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, like an extension of her own body after months of rigorous training. She had been assigned to Fort Benning's Advanced Marksmanship Unit just 6 months earlier, fresh out of sniper school with scores that had made even her instructors take notice. Sarah's journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. Growing up in a small town in Montana, she had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her grandfather, a World War II veteran, had taught her the fundamentals on an old bolt-action rifle behind their ranch house. What started as weekend target practice had evolved into something extraordinary. By age 12, Sarah could hit a tin can at 300 yards with iron sights. By 16, she was winning state-level competitions against seasoned adults. The decision to join the Army had surprised everyone in her hometown. Sarah had received a full scholarship to study engineering at Montana State University, but something deeper called to her. Perhaps it was her grandfather's stories about serving his country, or maybe it was the desire to test her skills against the world's best marksmen. Whatever the reason, she enlisted the day after her 18th birthday, much to her parents' initial dismay. Basic training had been a rude awakening. Sarah quickly learned that her natural shooting ability, while impressive, was just one small piece of becoming a soldier. The physical demands were brutal, the mental pressure constant, and the environment completely foreign to someone who had grown up with wide open spaces and quiet mornings. But Sarah possessed something that couldn't be taught: an unwavering determination and an almost supernatural calm under pressure. Her drill sergeants noticed her unique qualities within the first week. While other recruits struggled with stress positions and sleep deprivation, Sarah seemed to find an inner stillness that allowed her to function at peak performance regardless of the circumstances. During weapons training, she consistently outperformed soldiers who had been handling firearms for years. Her groupings were tight, her breathing controlled, and her follow-through flawless. The Advanced Marksmanship Unit was an elite program within the Army, designed to identify and develop the most promising shooters for specialized roles. Selection was highly competitive, with candidates drawn from across all branches of the military. Sarah's instructors from basic training had recommended her without hesitation, citing not only her exceptional marksmanship but also her mental toughness and natural leadership qualities. The training at Fort Benning was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The days began before dawn with physical conditioning that pushed her body to its absolute limits. Ruck marches with 60-pound packs across Georgia's unforgiving terrain, obstacle courses that tested both strength and agility, and hand-to-hand combat training that left her bruised and exhausted. But it was the marksmanship training that truly set this program apart. The M24 sniper weapon system became Sarah's primary focus. This bolt-action rifle, chambered in 7.62 by 51 mm NATO, was capable of incredible precision in the hands of a skilled operator. The weapon featured a heavy barrel for improved accuracy, an adjustable stock for proper fit, and a Leupold scope that could magnify targets up to 10 times their actual size. Learning to master this system required understanding ballistics, wind drift, temperature effects, and dozens of other variables that could affect a bullet's trajectory over long distances. Sarah's natural abilities translated remarkably well to the M24. Her instructors were amazed at how quickly she adapted to the weapon's characteristics and began consistently hitting targets at ranges that challenged even experienced snipers. The 600-yard course that typically took weeks for students to master became routine for Sarah within days. Soon, she was engaging targets at 800, 1,000, and even 1,200 yards with devastating accuracy. The training wasn't limited to long-range precision shooting. Modern military snipers needed to be complete warriors, capable of operating independently in hostile territory for extended periods. Sarah learned fieldcraft techniques that would allow her to move undetected across various terrains. She studied camouflage and concealment, practicing for hours to create hides that were virtually invisible from just feet away. Navigation, communications, and basic medical skills rounded out her education. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah learned about the mental aspects of being a sniper. Unlike the Hollywood portrayals of emotionless killers, real military snipers required tremendous psychological strength and moral clarity. They might spend days or weeks observing a target area, gathering intelligence and waiting for the perfect opportunity. When that moment came, they needed to make split-second decisions that could affect the outcome of entire missions and the lives of their fellow soldiers. The instructors at Fort Benning were all combat veterans who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones around the world. They shared their experiences freely, teaching lessons that couldn't be found in any manual. They spoke about the weight of responsibility that came with carrying a sniper rifle, the importance of positive target identification, and the reality that every shot fired in combat could have far-reaching consequences. Sarah absorbed these lessons with the same intensity she brought to her marksmanship training. She understood that becoming a sniper wasn't just about developing technical skills, it was about accepting a role that would set her apart from other soldiers. Snipers operated in a different world, one where patience, precision, and independent judgment were more valuable than raw courage or physical strength. As her training progressed, Sarah began to stand out even among her exceptionally talented classmates. Her shooting scores consistently ranked at the top of the class, but it was her overall performance that caught everyone's attention. She excelled at every aspect of the program, from physical fitness to academic subjects like ballistics and meteorology. Her peers respected her abilities without resenting her success, largely because Sarah remained humble and always willing to help struggling classmates. The instructors began to take special notice of Sarah's unique shooting style. While most snipers learn to control their breathing and heart rate through conscious effort, Sarah seemed to enter an almost meditative state when engaging targets. Her natural rhythm was perfectly suited to precision shooting, and she had developed an intuitive understanding of wind and weather conditions that took most snipers years to acquire. One particular exercise demonstrated Sarah's exceptional abilities in a way that left her instructors speechless. The scenario involved engaging multiple targets at varying ranges while under simulated combat stress. Students had to low-crawl nearly a mile through thick underbrush, set up a shooting position without being detected by observers, and then engage 5 targets in a specific sequence within a tight time limit. The targets ranged from 400 to 1,100 yards and were positioned to require different shooting positions and sight adjustments. Most students struggled to even locate all 5 targets within the allotted time. Those who found them often missed several shots due to the stress and physical exhaustion from the approach. Sarah not only found all 5 targets quickly but engaged them in the correct sequence with 5 consecutive hits. Her shooting time from first to last shot was under 90 seconds, a pace that would have been impressive on a cone range with no time pressure. What made this performance even more remarkable was Sarah's composure throughout the exercise. While her classmates showed visible signs of stress and fatigue, she appeared almost relaxed as she worked through the target sequence. Her breathing remained controlled, her movements smooth and deliberate. It was as if she had found a way to separate her mind from the physical and mental pressures surrounding her. The lead instructor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, had been training snipers for over 15 years and had never seen anything quite like Sarah's performance. After the exercise, he pulled her aside for a private conversation. Rodriguez was a man of few words, known for his direct manner and high standards. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a sniper and was respected throughout the military for his combat experience and teaching ability. Rodriguez looked Sarah directly in the eyes and asked her a simple question: "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah's response was equally direct. She explained her background growing up in Montana, the countless hours spent with her grandfather, and the natural progression from hunting and competition shooting to military service. Rodriguez listened carefully, nodding occasionally but mostly just observing Sarah's demeanor as she spoke. What struck Rodriguez most was Sarah's lack of arrogance or bravado. Despite her obvious talents, she spoke about her abilities as if they were nothing special, just the result of practice and good instruction. This humility, combined with her exceptional skills, convinced Rodriguez that Sarah was destined for something extraordinary in her military career. The conversation with Rodriguez marked a turning point in Sarah's training experience. Word of her exceptional performance began to spread beyond the advanced marksmanship unit. Senior officers started paying attention to her progress, and there was speculation that she might be selected for even more specialized training programs. Sarah tried to ignore the attention and focus on her immediate goals, but she couldn't help but wonder what opportunities might lie ahead. As her training at Fort Benning neared its end, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed since arriving 6 months earlier. The scared 18-year-old from Montana had been replaced by a confident, highly skilled soldier who was ready to serve her country in ways she had never imagined. The M24 rifle that had once felt foreign in her hands now seemed like a natural extension of her will, capable of reaching out and touching targets at distances that still amazed her classmates. The final weeks of training focused on advanced scenarios that simulated real-world combat conditions. Students worked in pairs, practicing the teamwork essential for sniper operations. Sarah was paired with Marcus Thompson, a former Marine who had transferred to the Army to pursue advanced sniper training. Thompson was an experienced soldier with a tour in Iraq under his belt, and he brought a practical understanding of combat operations that complemented Sarah's natural shooting abilities. The partnership between Sarah and Thompson proved to be exceptionally effective. Thompson's experience helped Sarah understand the tactical applications of her marksmanship skills, while her precision shooting abilities gave Thompson confidence that any target they were assigned could be successfully engaged. Their communication was seamless, and they developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities and limitations. One of their final exercises took place at a remote training facility in the mountains of North Georgia. The scenario involved a week-long mission where sniper teams had to infiltrate a target area, conduct surveillance operations, and engage specific high-value targets when the opportunity presented itself. The exercise was designed to test every skill the students had learned, from fieldcraft and navigation to marksmanship and mission planning. Sarah and Thompson spent 3 days moving through dense forest terrain, avoiding detection by roving patrols while making their way to the designated target area. They carried everything they needed for the week-long mission, including food, water, communications equipment, and ammunition. The weight of their packs exceeded 70 pounds, and the terrain was unforgiving, but both soldiers maintained their pace and remained focused on the mission objectives. When they reached their assigned position overlooking the target area, Sarah and Thompson spent hours constructing a hide that would allow them to observe the area without being detected. Using natural materials and camouflage netting, they created a position that was invisible from more than a few feet away. The construction required patience and attention to detail, as any mistake could compromise their entire mission. The target area contained several buildings and vehicle positions that simulated a terrorist training camp. Throughout the week, various scenarios would play out, and the sniper teams had to identify and engage specific targets while avoiding civilian role-players mixed in with the legitimate targets. This aspect of the training was particularly important, as it emphasized the crucial importance of positive target identification in real-world operations. On the 4th day of the exercise, Sarah's exceptional abilities were put to the ultimate test. The scenario called for engaging a high-value target who would appear briefly at one of several possible locations spread across the target area. The distances to these locations ranged from 600 to 1,400 yards, and the teams had to be prepared to engage any of them on short notice. Environmental conditions were challenging, with variable winds and changing light conditions throughout the day. When the target finally appeared, it was at the maximum range position, nearly 1,400 yards from Sarah's hide. The target was exposed for less than 30 seconds, barely enough time for most snipers to acquire and engage. The wind conditions were tricky, with gusts coming from multiple directions due to the mountainous terrain. Most students would have considered the shot extremely difficult under these conditions, with a low probability of success. Sarah calmly adjusted her scope, calculated the wind drift and bullet drop, and settled into her shooting position. Her breathing slowed to its natural rhythm, and she seemed to enter that meditative state her instructors had observed before. When she squeezed the trigger, the shot felt perfect even before she could see the impact. Through her scope, she watched the target drop immediately, struck center mass by her bullet after its nearly 2-second flight. The radio crackled with confirmation from the range safety officers who had been observing the exercise. Not only had Sarah made a successful hit at extreme range under difficult conditions, but her bullet placement had been perfect. Thompson looked at her with amazement and shook his head slowly. Even with his combat experience, he had never seen shooting of this caliber outside of the most elite special operations units. The exercise continued for the remaining days, but Sarah's long-range shot had already become the talk of the training facility. Instructors who had been teaching advanced marksmanship for decades were comparing it to legendary shots they had heard about but never witnessed personally. The combination of distance, conditions, and time pressure had created a scenario that tested the absolute limits of both equipment and human capability, and Sarah had executed it flawlessly. As the advanced marksmanship unit training concluded, Sarah found herself facing decisions about her future military career that she had never anticipated. Her exceptional performance had attracted attention from some of the Army's most elite units, and she was being offered opportunities that typically went to soldiers with years of combat experience. The choices she made in the coming weeks would determine not only her own future but potentially impact military operations around the world. The young woman from Montana who had enlisted with dreams of serving her country was about to discover that her natural talents and dedication had opened doors to a world she never knew existed. The M24 rifle that had become so familiar in her hands would soon carry a reputation that would follow her throughout her military career, marking her as one of the most gifted marksmen of her generation. 3 weeks after graduating from the Advanced Marksmanship Unit, Sarah found herself on a transport plane bound for Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The orders had come through official channels, but the details were classified far above her current security clearance level. All she knew was that she had been selected for a special assignment with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers who provided aviation support for the military's most elite units. The flight gave Sarah time to reflect on the whirlwind of events that had followed her graduation from sniper school. Her performance during training had generated reports that reached the highest levels of military command. Within days of completing her final exercise, she had been visited by officers whose unit patches she didn't recognize and whose questions seemed designed to probe not just her technical abilities but her psychological makeup and personal motivations. The interviews had been unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her military service. The officers were polite but intensely focused, asking detailed questions about her family background, personal relationships, and long-term career goals. They wanted to understand what drove her to excel, how she handled pressure, and whether she could operate effectively with minimal supervision in high-stress environments. The psychological evaluation had been particularly thorough, exploring her emotional stability and decision-making processes under extreme conditions. Sarah had answered all questions honestly, though she sometimes wondered what the interviewers were really looking for. Her small-town background and close family relationships seemed to satisfy them, as did her demonstrated ability to remain calm under pressure. When they asked about her willingness to undertake dangerous assignments in service of her country, Sarah's response was immediate and unequivocal. She had joined the Army to serve, and she was prepared to go wherever that service might lead. The transport plane began its descent toward Fort Campbell, and Sarah could see the sprawling military installation below. Campbell was home to the 101st Airborne Division and several special operations units, making it one of the most important military bases in the United States. The sight of the massive airfield, filled with helicopters and transport aircraft, reminded Sarah that she was entering a completely different world from the training environment she had known. Upon landing, Sarah was met by a sergeant who introduced himself simply as Johnson. He was clearly Special Operations, though his exact unit affiliation wasn't immediately apparent. Johnson was polite but businesslike, explaining that Sarah would be billeted in temporary quarters while awaiting her security clearance upgrades and assignment details. He handed her a schedule that included additional psychological evaluations, physical fitness tests, and meetings with various officials whose titles were mostly redacted. The temporary quarters turned out to be surprisingly comfortable, located in a section of the base that seemed reserved for personnel undergoing special processing. Sarah's neighbors appeared to be other soldiers, sailors, and Marines who were similarly awaiting assignment to classified programs. Conversations were limited and carefully neutral, as everyone understood that discussing their presence at Campbell could violate security protocols. Sarah's first morning at Fort Campbell began with a physical fitness test that was far more demanding than anything she had experienced during her previous training. The evaluators were looking for more than basic fitness. They wanted to assess her performance under extreme physical stress and her ability to maintain fine motor control when exhausted. The test included long-distance running, obstacle courses, and marksmanship exercises conducted after grueling physical exertion. The marksmanship portion of the evaluation was conducted with her familiar M24 rifle, but the conditions were designed to simulate combat stress as closely as possible. After completing a 5-mile run in full gear, Sarah had to immediately engage targets at various ranges while her heart rate was still elevated and her body was dealing with fatigue. The evaluators watched carefully as she controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting positions, looking for any degradation in her legendary precision. To Sarah's satisfaction, her performance remained consistent despite the physical demands. Her shot groups were tight, her target engagement times remained fast, and she demonstrated the same calm focus that had impressed her instructors at Fort Benning. The evaluators took detailed notes but offered no immediate feedback, maintaining the professional distance that seemed to characterize all interactions at this level of military operations. The psychological evaluations were equally thorough and considerably more invasive than those Sarah had experienced during her initial interviews. The examining officers explored her family history in minute detail, looking for any factors that might affect her reliability or judgment. They were particularly interested in her relationship with her grandfather and how his military service had influenced her own decision to enlist. One session focused specifically on her shooting abilities and how she experienced the act of engaging targets at long range. The psychologist, a civilian contractor with extensive experience evaluating special operations personnel, wanted to understand Sarah's mental state during precision shooting. Did she experience any emotional reactions when engaging human-shaped targets? How did she maintain concentration during extended observation periods? Could she make life-and-death decisions quickly and without hesitation? Sarah found these questions more challenging to answer than the technical marksmanship queries she was accustomed to. She tried to explain her mental state during shooting as a form of focused calm, where external distractions seemed to fade away and her entire attention narrowed to the task at hand. She had never experienced any emotional difficulty with engaging targets, even realistic human silhouettes, because she understood they were training exercises designed to prepare her for defending her fellow soldiers. The psychologist seemed satisfied with Sarah's responses, but he continued probing her attitudes toward violence and her understanding of the moral complexities involved in military operations. Sarah's answers reflected her upbringing and the values instilled by her grandfather. Violence was sometimes necessary to protect the innocent, and soldiers had a moral obligation to use their skills responsibly and with proper authority. She would never hesitate to pull the trigger if it meant saving the lives of her fellow soldiers or innocent civilians. Between evaluations, Sarah spent her time maintaining her physical fitness and practicing her marksmanship skills at Campbell's extensive training facilities. The ranges were far more sophisticated than anything she had used before, with electronic scoring systems, variable weather simulators, and target arrays that could be configured for incredibly complex scenarios. She also had access to advanced training equipment, including night vision systems and thermal imaging devices that opened up entirely new possibilities for precision shooting. During one of these practice sessions, Sarah encountered Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, a veteran sniper who was conducting advanced training for special operations personnel. Williams had served multiple combat tours and was known throughout the special operations community for her exceptional skills and leadership abilities. She had heard about Sarah's reputation and was curious to observe the young sniper who had generated so much attention. Williams watched Sarah work through a complex shooting scenario that involved engaging multiple targets at varying ranges while using different shooting positions and equipment configurations. The exercise was designed to test adaptability and technical proficiency under changing conditions. Sarah moved smoothly through the course, engaging each target with precision while demonstrating textbook technique throughout. After the exercise, Williams approached Sarah with a mixture of professional respect and maternal concern. As one of the few women who had succeeded in the male-dominated world of military sniping, she understood the unique challenges Sarah would face as her career progressed. Williams shared some of her own experiences, offering advice about maintaining professionalism in difficult situations and developing the mental toughness required for combat operations. The conversation with Williams was particularly valuable because she could speak from experience about the realities of combat sniping that no training scenario could fully replicate. She described the weight of responsibility that came with taking lives from long distances, the importance of absolute certainty in target identification, and the psychological aftermath of combat operations. Williams emphasized that technical skill, while essential, was only part of being an effective sniper. Mental preparation and emotional resilience were equally important. Williams also provided practical advice about equipment and tactics that Sarah might encounter in operational environments. Different theaters of operation presented unique challenges, from desert conditions that affected equipment performance to urban environments that limited fields of fire and increased the risk of civilian casualties. The lessons learned through combat experience couldn't be taught in any classroom, but Williams could at least prepare Sarah for some of the realities she would eventually face. As their conversation concluded, Williams made an observation that would stay with Sarah for the rest of her career. She noted that exceptional marksmanship was relatively rare, but the combination of technical skill, mental toughness, and sound judgment was extraordinarily uncommon. Sarah possessed all three qualities at a very young age, which meant she would likely be given assignments that would test her abilities in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The security clearance process proved to be more time-consuming than Sarah had anticipated. Background investigators interviewed her family members, former teachers, and anyone else who had known her throughout her life. They were looking for any indication of divided loyalties, financial problems, or personal characteristics that might make her unsuitable for classified assignments. The thoroughness of the investigation was both impressive and slightly unsettling, as Sarah realized that every aspect of her life was being examined by people she would never meet. During this waiting period, Sarah continued her training and began receiving specialized instruction in areas she had never encountered before. She learned about advanced communications equipment that would allow her to coordinate with various military units and intelligence agencies. The technology was far more sophisticated than anything she had used during her previous training, with encrypted channels and satellite communication capabilities that could function in even the most remote locations. She also received briefings on international law and the rules of engagement that governed military operations in different parts of the world. The legal framework surrounding military sniping was complex, involving not only military regulations but also international treaties and agreements that affected how operations could be conducted. Sarah learned about the documentation requirements for long-range engagements, the importance of maintaining detailed logs of all activities, and the legal protections available to soldiers operating under proper authority. The medical training was particularly intensive, as snipers often operated in remote locations where immediate medical support was not available. Sarah learned advanced first aid techniques, including trauma surgery procedures that could save lives in emergency situations. She practiced these skills repeatedly until they became second nature, understanding that her ability to treat wounded personnel might be as important as her marksmanship abilities in certain situations. Language training was another component of her preparation, though the specific languages she studied provided hints about her eventual assignment location. Sarah found herself learning basic conversational skills in Arabic and Pashto, languages that were primarily used in Middle Eastern and Central Asian countries. The instructors were careful not to provide any specific information about where these skills might be needed, but Sarah could draw her own conclusions about the regions where she might eventually serve. Physical conditioning continued throughout this period, with emphasis on skills that would be particularly relevant for extended field operations. Sarah learned advanced mountaineering techniques, desert survival skills, and urban navigation methods. She practiced these skills in various environments around Fort Campbell, gradually building the expertise needed to operate effectively in almost any geographic region. The weapons training expanded beyond her familiar M24 rifle to include various other systems she might encounter in the field. She learned to operate foreign weapons that she might need to use if her primary equipment was damaged or unavailable. This included Russian, Chinese, and European systems that were common in various parts of the world. The diversity of weapons training suggested that her assignments would likely take her to regions where American equipment might not be readily available. Electronic warfare training was perhaps the most surprising addition to her curriculum. Sarah learned about the electronic systems that enemy forces might use to detect or track sniper positions, and the countermeasures available to defeat these systems. She practiced using various electronic devices that could jam communications, disrupt surveillance systems, or provide false targeting information to enemy forces. This training revealed the increasingly high-tech nature of modern military operations and the need for snipers to understand more than just marksmanship. After nearly 2 months at Fort Campbell, Sarah's security clearance finally came through, along with her first operational assignment. The orders were classified, but she was authorized to know that she would be deploying to Afghanistan as part of a joint special operations task force. Her role would involve providing precision fire support for various missions, ranging from direct action operations to intelligence gathering activities. The briefing about her assignment was conducted by Colonel James Mitchell, a career special operations officer who had commanded units in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several other locations that remained classified. Mitchell was direct and professional, explaining that Sarah's reputation had preceded her and that her skills would be crucial to the task force's success. He emphasized that the assignment would be demanding and potentially dangerous, but that she had been specifically selected because of her exceptional abilities. Mitchell explained that the task force operated in close coordination with various intelligence agencies and allied military units. The missions were typically high-priority operations that required precision and discretion, characteristics that made Sarah's skills particularly valuable. She would be working with some of the most experienced special operations personnel in the military, and she would be expected to perform at their level despite her relative lack of combat experience. The colonel also addressed the unique challenges Sarah would face as one of the few women in the special operations community. While the military had made significant progress in integrating women into combat roles, the reality was that she would often be the only female member of her unit. Mitchell emphasized that she had been selected based purely on her abilities, and that she should expect to be treated as a professional colleague by her teammates. As the briefing concluded, Colonel Mitchell handed Sarah a set of orders that would change her life forever. She was being assigned to a task force that operated under direct authority from the Joint Special Operations Command, putting her at the very center of America's most sensitive military operations. The young woman from Montana who had learned to shoot tin cans behind her grandfather's ranch was about to enter a world where her decisions could affect the outcome of entire military campaigns. The flight to Afghanistan was scheduled for the following week, giving Sarah just enough time to complete her final preparations and say goodbye to the temporary home she had made at Fort Campbell. As she packed her gear, including the M24 rifle that had become such an important part of her identity, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The skills her grandfather had taught her as a child had evolved into capabilities that would soon be tested in one of the world's most dangerous environments. Sarah's last night in the United States was spent writing letters to her family, knowing that communication would be limited and irregular during her deployment. She tried to explain her excitement about the opportunity to serve at such a high level while reassuring her parents that she was well trained and would be working with the best soldiers in the military. The letters were necessarily vague about her specific assignment, but Sarah hoped her family would understand that she was pursuing something that gave her life meaning and purpose. As dawn broke over Fort Campbell on Sarah's final morning in Kentucky, she made her way to the airfield where a transport aircraft was waiting. Her gear had been loaded the night before, and all that remained was to board the plane and begin the journey to Afghanistan. Sarah carried her M24 rifle in a protective case, the weapon that had already earned her recognition as one of the most promising young snipers in military history. The other passengers on the transport were all special operations personnel heading to various assignments throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. They were a quiet, professional group who understood the nature of their work and the importance of operational security. Sarah found herself fitting naturally into this environment, her calm demeanor and obvious competence earning the respect of soldiers who were known for their high standards. As the aircraft climbed toward its cruising altitude and turned east toward Afghanistan, Sarah looked out the window at the American landscape passing below. She knew it would be months before she saw home again, and she had no way of knowing what experiences awaited her in the war-torn mountains and valleys of Afghanistan. What she did know was that she was as prepared as training could make her, and that her exceptional abilities would soon be tested in the ultimate arena of combat operations. The transport aircraft descended through thick clouds above Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, as Sarah pressed her face to the small window to catch her first glimpse of the country that would become her home for the next year. The landscape below was harsh and unforgiving, with brown mountains stretching endlessly toward the horizon and scattered patches of green marking river valleys and agricultural areas. The contrast with the lush forests of Fort Campbell was striking, and Sarah could already feel the dry air seeping into the aircraft as they approached landing. Bagram Airfield was a massive military installation that served as the logistical hub for coalition forces throughout Afghanistan. The runway stretched for miles, accommodated everything from small transport planes to massive cargo aircraft bringing supplies and personnel from around the world. As Sarah's plane taxied toward the terminal area, she could see helicopters, fighter jets, and transport aircraft from dozens of different countries, a visible reminder of the international nature of the conflict she was about to join. The heat hit Sarah like a physical blow as she stepped off the aircraft. Despite arriving in early morning, the temperature was already climbing toward triple digits, and the thin mountain air made every breath feel inadequate. The smell of jet fuel, dust, and diesel exhaust filled her nostrils, while the constant noise of aircraft operations created a background din that would become familiar over the coming months. Sarah gathered her gear and made her way toward the processing facility, where new arrivals were documented and assigned to their respective units. The in-processing at Bagram was efficient but impersonal, handled by soldiers who had seen thousands of new arrivals and understood that most would be gone within a year. Sarah's classified status expedited some of the procedures, and within hours she found herself boarding a smaller aircraft bound for Forward Operating Base Chapman, located in the mountains near the Pakistani border. This smaller, more isolated base would be her home while she served with Task Force 373, the Joint Special Operations Unit that had specifically requested her assignment. Forward Operating Base Chapman was a world apart from the massive installations Sarah had known during her training. The base consisted of prefabricated buildings, fortified positions, and helicopter landing pads carved out of a mountainous plateau that offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys. The entire facility could have fit inside a corner of Fort Campbell, but what it lacked in size it made up for in importance. Chapman was a staging area for some of the most sensitive operations being conducted in the Afghan theater. Sarah's arrival at Chapman was expected, and she was quickly introduced to Major Robert Hayes, the officer who would be her immediate supervisor during her deployment. Hayes was a career special operations officer who had spent most of the last decade deployed to various conflict zones around the world. He had specifically requested Sarah's assignment based on reports of her exceptional marksmanship abilities and her performance during advanced training. Major Hayes wasted no time in explaining Sarah's role within Task Force 373. The unit conducted high-priority missions throughout eastern Afghanistan, often in support of intelligence operations or direct action missions against high-value targets. Sarah would be part of a small team of specialists who provided precision fire support for these operations, operating from concealed positions that could be miles away from the primary objective areas. The briefing continued with an overview of the operational environment in eastern Afghanistan. The region was mountainous and largely controlled by Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces who used the terrain to their advantage. Coalition forces operated from scattered bases connected by helicopter flights, as ground travel was extremely dangerous due to improvised explosive devices and ambush attacks. The enemy was well armed, experienced, and intimately familiar with the local terrain and population. Sarah's specific assignment involved working with a team led by Sergeant First Class David Chen, a veteran sniper who had been operating in Afghanistan for over 2 years. Chen had built an exceptional reputation for both his marksmanship skills and his ability to operate effectively in the challenging Afghan environment. He would serve as Sarah's mentor and team leader, helping her adapt to combat operations while learning to utilize her exceptional abilities. The introduction to Sergeant Chen took place that evening in the team's operations center, a secure facility where mission planning and equipment maintenance took place. Chen was a quiet, methodical professional who immediately impressed Sarah with his attention to detail and obvious expertise. He had reviewed her training records and was aware of her reputation, but he made clear that combat operations were different from any training she had experienced. Chen's team consisted of 4 members including Sarah, himself, Sarah, Corporal Mike Rodriguez who served as spotter and communications specialist, and Staff Sergeant Tom Wilson who handled security and logistics. Each member brought specific skills that complemented the others, creating a unit that could operate independently for extended periods while providing precision fire support for larger operations. The team's equipment was far more sophisticated than anything Sarah had used during training. Her M24 rifle had been upgraded with advanced optics, improved triggers, and specialized ammunition designed for the extreme ranges common in Afghan operations. The team also had access to various other weapons systems, including lighter sniper rifles for situations requiring rapid movement and heavy rifles for extreme long-range engagements. Sarah's first week at Chapman was devoted to acclimatization and additional training specific to the Afghan environment. The altitude at Chapman was over 7,000 feet, and the thin air significantly affected both physical performance and ballistics calculations. Sarah had to recalibrate her shooting techniques to account for the reduced air density, which caused bullets to fly differently than they did at sea level. The extreme temperature variations between day and night also affected equipment performance and required constant adjustments. The terrain around Chapman provided excellent training opportunities for long-range shooting. The mountainous landscape offered clear lines of sight extending for miles, with targets visible at ranges that would have been impossible in more heavily vegetated areas. Sarah spent hours each day practicing shots at distances she had never attempted before, gradually extending her effective range while learning to read the complex wind patterns that swirl through the mountain valleys. Chin personally supervised much of Sarah's training, sharing techniques he had developed through hard experience in combat operations. He taught her to read the subtle environmental signs that could affect bullet trajectory, changes in vegetation that indicated wind patterns, temperature variations that occurred at different elevations, and atmospheric conditions that could make targets appear closer or farther than they actually were. These lessons couldn't be learned from manuals, they required experience and careful observation. The psychological aspects of combat operations received equal attention during Sarah's orientation period. Chen explained how the stress of actual combat affected both physical and mental performance, often in ways that couldn't be replicated during training exercises. The knowledge that enemy forces were actively trying to kill you, that your decisions could affect the lives of fellow soldiers, and that mistakes could have fatal consequences created pressures that even the most realistic training couldn't duplicate. Sarah also received detailed briefings about the enemy forces operating in their area of responsibility. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters were experienced, well-equipped, and intimately familiar with the local terrain. Many had been fighting in Afghanistan for years and had developed sophisticated tactics for countering American technological advantages. They were particularly skilled at camouflage and concealment, often remaining hidden until coalition forces were within range of their weapons. The intelligence picture painted by these briefings was sobering. Enemy forces controlled most of the rural areas around Chapman, moving freely through mountain passes and valleys that coalition forces could only reach by helicopter. They had established supply lines running into Pakistan and maintained communications networks that allowed them to coordinate attacks across wide areas. Most concerning was their use of advanced weapons, including sniper rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, that posed serious threats to coalition personnel. Sarah's first operational mission came after 2 weeks of intensive training and preparation. The task force had received intelligence about a high-value target meeting scheduled to take place in a remote valley approximately 15 miles from Chapman. Sarah's team would establish an overwatch position on a mountain ridge overlooking the target area, providing reconnaissance and precision fire support if needed. The mission began before dawn, with the team boarding a Black Hawk helicopter for the flight to their insertion point. The helicopter flew at extremely low altitude through mountain valleys, using terrain masking to avoid detection by enemy forces. Sarah found the flight both exhilarating and terrifying, as the aircraft seemed to skim just feet above the ground while navigating between towering mountain peaks in complete darkness. The insertion was conducted several miles from the target area to avoid alerting enemy forces to the team's presence. Sarah and her teammates disembarked quickly and moved into concealed positions while the helicopter departed, leaving them alone in hostile territory. The silence that followed the helicopter's departure was profound, broken only by the wind whistling through the mountain passes and the distant sound of rocks falling down steep slopes. The approach to their overwatch position took most of the day, as the team moved carefully through terrain that offered little concealment. They traveled primarily during daylight hours when they could see potential threats, stopping frequently to observe their surroundings and ensure they weren't being tracked by enemy forces. The physical demands of moving through mountainous terrain at high altitude while carrying heavy equipment tested everyone's endurance. Sarah found the approach much more challenging than any training exercise she had experienced. The combination of altitude, heat, and the weight of her equipment pushed her physical conditioning to its limits. More difficult was the constant mental stress of operating in an environment where enemy contact was possible at any moment. Every sound, every movement in the distance, every change in the local bird or animal activity had to be evaluated as a potential threat. The team reached their overwatch position late in the afternoon, establishing a hide on a rocky ledge that provided excellent visibility over the target valley while offering protection from observation. The position was approximately 1,200 yards from the building where the meeting was supposed to take place, well within the effective range of Sarah's M24 rifle but far enough away to provide some safety margin if the mission was compromised. Constructing the hide required several hours of careful work, using natural materials and camouflage netting to create positions that would be invisible to enemy observation. Each team member had specific responsibilities. Chen established the primary shooting position, Rodriguez set up communications equipment and spotting scopes, Wilson created security positions covering their flanks, and Sarah prepared backup shooting positions that could be used if the primary position was compromised. As darkness fell over the valley, Sarah experienced combat nerves for the first time in her military career. The knowledge that enemy forces were operating in the surrounding area, that she might have to kill someone within the next few hours, and that her own life was potentially at risk created a level of stress she had never encountered. She found herself checking and rechecking her equipment, adjusting her shooting position repeatedly, and struggling to maintain the calm focus that had characterized her training performance. Chen noticed Sarah's nervousness and quietly moved to her position for a brief conversation. He explained that combat anxiety was normal and experienced by every soldier, regardless of their training or experience level. The key was to channel that nervous energy into heightened awareness and preparation while not allowing it to interfere with performance when the moment came. He shared some of his own experiences from early combat missions, helping Sarah understand that her feelings were both normal and manageable. The waiting period that followed was perhaps the most difficult part of the mission for Sarah. Hour after hour passed with no activity in the target area, while the team maintained constant observation through night vision devices and thermal imaging equipment. The mental strain of sustained alertness, combined with the physical discomfort of remaining motionless in a rocky hide, tested everyone's endurance and concentration. Shortly after midnight, the team's patience was rewarded when vehicles began arriving at the target building. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see armed men establishing security positions around the building while others carried equipment and supplies inside. The activity continued for over an hour, with approximately 20 individuals eventually gathering for what appeared to be an important meeting. The intelligence analysts back at Chapman had provided detailed descriptions of the high-value targets who might attend the meeting, and Chen used his spotting scope to identify specific individuals as they moved around the target area. The positive identification process was critical, as the rules of engagement required absolute certainty before any shots could be fired. Mistaken identity in this type of operation could have diplomatic and strategic consequences far beyond the immediate tactical situation. At 0300 hours, Chen confirmed the presence of the primary target, a Taliban commander who had been responsible for several attacks against coalition forces in the region. The individual matched the physical description provided by intelligence sources and was observed giving orders to other members of the group. Chen made the decision to engage, assigning Sarah the primary shot while he served as spotter and backup shooter. The preparation for the shot required careful calculation of all the factors that could affect bullet trajectory at such an extreme range. The distance to target was precisely measured at 1,247 yards, requiring significant adjustments for bullet drop and wind drift. The temperature had dropped considerably since sunset, affecting both the ballistic performance of the ammunition and the accuracy of the range-finding equipment. Wind conditions were complex, with different velocities and directions at various points along the bullet's flight path. Sarah settled into her shooting position with the calm focus that had impressed her instructors throughout her training. The combat stress that had affected her earlier in the evening seemed to fade away as she entered the meditative state that characterized her best shooting performances. Her breathing slowed to its natural rhythm, her heart rate decreased, and her entire attention narrowed to the complex calculations required for the shot. The actual engagement happened with startling suddenness after hours of careful preparation. Chen provided final wind and range corrections, confirmed the target identification one last time, and gave Sarah permission to fire. Her shot was perfect, striking the target's center mass and immediately eliminating the threat. The sound of the rifle shot echoed across the valley, alerting every enemy fighter in the area to the presence of coalition forces. The enemy response was swift and well-coordinated, demonstrating the level of training and experience possessed by Taliban forces in the region. Within minutes of Sarah's shot, enemy fighters were moving to establish positions that would allow them to locate and engage the sniper team. Mortar rounds began impacting in the general area of the team's hide, forcing them to prepare for immediate extraction. The helicopter extraction took place under fire, with enemy tracers lighting up the night sky as the aircraft approached the team's position. Sarah and her teammates provided covering fire while moving to the extraction point, engaging enemy positions that were trying to prevent the helicopter from landing. The entire sequence from shot to extraction lasted less than 30 minutes, but it provided Sarah with a comprehensive introduction to the realities of combat operations. The flight back to Chapman gave Sarah time to process her first combat experience and the knowledge that she had taken a human life in service of her country. The enemy commander she had killed was responsible for attacks that had resulted in American casualties, making her action both tactically justified and strategically important. Nevertheless, the reality of killing another human being, even a legitimate military target, was psychologically significant in ways that no training had fully prepared her for. Chen debriefed the mission immediately upon return to Chapman, praising Sarah's performance under combat conditions and her adaptation to the stresses of actual operations. Her shot had been technically perfect, demonstrating that her exceptional marksmanship abilities translated effectively to combat situations. More importantly, she had maintained her composure throughout the engagement and worked effectively as part of the team. The success of Sarah's first mission established her reputation within Task Force 373 and led to her inclusion in increasingly complex and important operations. Word of her exceptional long-range shooting abilities spread throughout the special operations community in Afghanistan, and she began receiving requests for support from units operating across the eastern part of the country. Her M24 rifle, already marked by her exceptional training performance, was beginning to develop the legendary status that would follow it throughout her military career. Over the following weeks, Sarah participated in numerous operations that tested every aspect of her training and abilities. She provided overwatch for direct action missions, conducted surveillance operations in hostile territory, and engaged targets at ranges that pushed the limits of her equipment and skills. Each mission added to her experience and confidence while contributing to the overall success of Task Force 373's operations in eastern Afghanistan. The reputation of Sarah's rifle became a topic of conversation throughout the special operations community, with other snipers referring to it as the Deadeye mark because of the consistent accuracy she achieved with it. The weapon had become an extension of her exceptional abilities, and together they were establishing a combat record that would influence military sniper training and tactics for years to come. The young woman from Montana was proving that exceptional marksmanship, when combined with proper training and the right opportunities, could have strategic impact on military operations. 6 months into her deployment, Sarah had become a legend within the special operations community in Afghanistan. Her confirmed kill count stood at 43 enemy combatants, all at ranges exceeding 800 yards, with many engagements taking place at distances that other snipers considered nearly impossible. The M24 rifle that had carried her through training had evolved into something approaching a mythical weapon, its reputation spreading far beyond the confines of Task Force 373. The morning that would change everything began like many others at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Sarah was conducting routine maintenance on her rifle when Major Hayes approached with an expression that immediately caught her attention. Hayes had been in special operations long enough to maintain his composure in almost any situation, but something about his demeanor suggested that he was dealing with an assignment unlike anything he had encountered before. Hayes led Sarah to a secure briefing room where she found Colonel Mitchell, the same officer who had originally assigned her to Task Force 373. Mitchell's presence at Chapman was highly unusual, as officers of his rank typically remained at higher headquarters facilities. The fact that he had traveled to this remote outpost suggested that whatever mission was being planned held extraordinary importance. The briefing that followed would remain classified for decades, but its basic parameters were straightforward enough. Intelligence sources had located a high-value target in a remote valley near the Pakistani border, approximately 60 miles from Chapman. The target was a senior al-Qaeda leader who had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region and was believed to be planning a major operation against American interests. What made this mission unique was the extreme range at which the engagement would have to take place. The target location was situated in a valley that could only be observed from a mountain peak nearly 2 miles away. Environmental conditions in the area made helicopter insertion extremely dangerous, requiring the sniper team to approach on foot through some of the most hostile terrain in Afghanistan. Most challenging of all, the shot would have to be made at a range exceeding 2,000 yards, far beyond what was considered possible with standard sniper equipment. Colonel Mitchell explained that several elite sniper teams had already declined the mission, considering the combination of factors to make success virtually impossible. The extreme range, hostile environment, and time constraints created a scenario that pushed beyond the limits of current military capabilities. However, Sarah's exceptional performance during her deployment had convinced senior commanders that if anyone could make such a shot, it would be her. The technical challenges involved in a 2,000-yard shot were staggering. At that distance, a standard 7.62mm bullet would drop over 400 inches from its initial trajectory, requiring massive adjustments to the rifle's scope. Wind effects became exponentially more significant, as even slight breezes could push the bullet several feet off target. Temperature, humidity, and altitude all affected bullet performance, and minor miscalculations could result in complete misses. Sarah listened to the briefing with growing excitement rather than apprehension. The challenge appealed to every aspect of her competitive nature and represented the ultimate test of the skills she had been developing throughout her military career. While other snipers saw insurmountable obstacles, Sarah saw a complex problem that could be solved through careful planning, precise calculations, and exceptional execution. The mission planning process took 3 days, with Sarah working closely with ballistics experts, meteorologists, and intelligence analysts to develop a comprehensive approach. Every factor that could affect bullet trajectory was analyzed and quantified, from the precise altitude of both shooting position and target to the predicted wind patterns throughout the bullet's flight path. Advanced computer models were used to calculate the theoretical requirements for success, though everyone understood that real-world conditions would ultimately determine the outcome. Sarah's M24 rifle required significant modifications to handle the extreme range requirements. The standard Leupold scope was replaced with a more powerful optics system that could provide accurate target resolution at over 2,000 yards. Special ammunition was procured that offered superior ballistic characteristics, with each round individually inspected and measured to ensure consistency. The rifle's trigger was adjusted to provide the precise response Sarah needed for such a demanding shot. The selection of Sarah's teammates for this mission reflected the operation's extraordinary requirements. Sergeant Chen would again serve as her spotter, bringing his extensive combat experience and expertise in long-range calculations. Staff Sergeant Wilson would handle security and communications, while a specialist from the Army's Ballistics Research Division joined the team to provide real-time environmental analysis and trajectory calculations. The approach to the target area required a week-long movement through some of Afghanistan's most dangerous terrain. The team would insert by helicopter at a location over 40 miles from their shooting position, then move on foot through mountain passes controlled by enemy forces. They would carry everything needed for the mission, including food, water, ammunition, and specialized equipment, while maintaining operational security in an environment where discovery would likely mean death. The insertion took place during a moonless night, with the helicopter crew using night vision systems to navigate through narrow mountain valleys without alerting enemy forces. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by peaks that rose thousands of feet on all sides, accessible only by pilots with exceptional skill and experience. Sarah felt her heart racing as the helicopter settled onto the rocky ground, knowing that the crew would not return until the mission was complete or the team called for emergency extraction. The first 3 days of movement tested every aspect of the team's preparation and endurance. They traveled primarily at night to avoid detection, navigating through terrain that seemed designed to prevent human passage. Rocky slopes covered with loose stones made silent movement nearly impossible, while narrow ledges required careful ropework to traverse safely. The altitude, consistently above 10,000 feet, made every physical effort exhausting. Sarah found the approach much more demanding than any challenge she had faced during her military service. The combination of extreme altitude, heavy equipment, and constant stress created physical and mental pressures that pushed her to her absolute limits. The knowledge that enemy forces were operating throughout the area added psychological stress that made rest difficult and sleep nearly impossible. The team's security procedures during the movement were extraordinarily strict, reflecting the high probability of enemy contact. They moved in single file with substantial spacing between individuals, allowing them to react independently if they encountered hostile forces. Communications were limited to hand signals and brief radio transmissions using codes that would be meaningless to intercepting enemy forces. Every stop required establishing security positions and conducting careful observation of the surrounding area. On the fourth day, the team reached a position within striking distance of their planned shooting location but encountered unexpected complications. Enemy forces had established a checkpoint along the route they needed to take, making it impossible to reach their primary position without engaging in combat that would compromise the entire mission. The team was forced to identify an alternative shooting location that offered clear lines of sight to the target area while remaining beyond the range of enemy observation. The alternative position was located on a ridge that rose nearly 12,000 feet above sea level, requiring an additional day of movement through terrain that seemed barely passable for humans. The climb was so steep in places that the team had to use mountaineering equipment to reach the summit, hauling their heavy packs and weapons up rocky faces that offered minimal handholds. The physical demands were extraordinary, but the position offered perfect visibility across the target valley while remaining completely hidden from enemy observation. Establishing the shooting position required an entire day of careful preparation. The hide had to be constructed to remain invisible from aerial observation while providing stable shooting platforms and protection from the extreme weather conditions common at high altitude. Every detail was critical, as the team would potentially spend several days in position waiting for the target to appear. The environmental conditions at the shooting position were unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her training or previous combat operations. The altitude made every breath inadequate, while temperature variations between day and night exceeded 50 degrees. Wind conditions were constantly changing, with gusts that could easily affect bullet trajectory at extreme range. The thin air also affected the performance of electronic equipment, requiring constant adjustments to maintain communications and target acquisition capabilities. Sarah spent the first night at the shooting position familiarizing herself with the unique conditions and making preliminary calculations for the shot. The distance to the target building was precisely measured at 2,347 yards, requiring adjustments that pushed her equipment beyond its design specifications. The scope had to be elevated to its maximum setting and, then, supplemented with additional calculations to account for the extreme bullet drop at that range. The ballistics specialist worked throughout the night developing refined trajectory calculations based on the actual environmental conditions at the shooting position. Computer models that had seemed accurate at lower altitudes required significant adjustments for the thin air and extreme temperature variations encountered at 12,000 feet. Every factor that could affect bullet performance was measured and incorporated into the calculations, creating a firing solution that existed at the very edge of theoretical possibility. The waiting period that followed tested everyone's patience and endurance while living in one of the world's most inhospitable environments. Daily temperatures ranged from below freezing at night to over 90 degrees during the day, requiring constant adjustments to equipment and clothing. The extreme altitude made physical activity exhausting, while the isolation and stress of the mission created psychological pressures that were difficult to manage. Sarah used the waiting period to practice her shooting positions and refine her preparations for the shot. She rehearsed the complex scope adjustments required, practiced her breathing techniques at altitude, and visualized the shot sequence repeatedly. The extreme range meant that she would have only one opportunity for success, as the sound of the first shot would immediately alert enemy forces to their presence and make a second attempt impossible. On the fifth day at the shooting position, intelligence reports confirmed that the target would be visiting the building that afternoon to meet with local Taliban commanders. The meeting was scheduled to last approximately 2 hours, providing a window of opportunity for the engagement. Sarah began her final preparations, checking and rechecking every piece of equipment while reviewing the firing solution one last time. The target appeared at the building shortly after 1400 hours, arriving in a convoy of vehicles that immediately established security positions around the area. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see armed guards taking positions while the high-value target entered the building with several other individuals. Intelligence analysis confirmed the positive identification, and Sarah received authorization to engage when a clear shot became available. The waiting for a clear shot felt interminable, as Sarah maintained her shooting position while observing the target area through her scope. The target appeared briefly at windows and doorways but never remained in position long enough for a safe engagement. The rules of engagement required absolute certainty of target identification and minimal risk to nearby individuals, factors that significantly limited the opportunities for a shot. At 1,547 hours, the target stepped onto a balcony overlooking the valley and remained stationary for what appeared to be a brief conversation with another individual. Sarah had perhaps 30 seconds to make all final calculations, acquire the target, and fire before the opportunity would be lost. The pressure of the moment was unlike anything she had experienced, but she drew upon all her training and experience to maintain focus. The shot Sarah fired that afternoon would be analyzed and discussed by military experts for decades to come. Every factor had been calculated perfectly: the 43-inch bullet drop, the 18-inch wind correction, the temperature effects on powder burn rate, and dozens of other variables that affected trajectory at extreme range. The bullet left her rifle at over 2,700 feet per second and required nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, during which time Sarah maintained perfect follow-through while tracking the target through her scope. The impact was immediately visible through Sarah's optics system, confirming a successful hit at a range that had previously been considered impossible for military sniper operations. The target dropped immediately, while his security detail began scrambling to identify the source of the shot. The extreme range meant that the sound of Sarah's rifle wouldn't reach the target area for several more seconds, providing additional confirmation of the incredible distance involved. The extraction from the shooting position began immediately after the successful engagement, as enemy forces throughout the region would soon be searching for the sniper team. The movement back to their extraction point required the same careful planning and execution that had characterized their approach, but with the added pressure of hostile forces actively seeking their location. The team moved continuously for 2 days, covering over 30 miles of mountain terrain before reaching safety. The helicopter extraction took place under cover of darkness, with the crew using advanced navigation systems to locate the team at a predetermined landing zone. Sarah felt profound relief as the aircraft lifted off and began the flight back to Chapman, carrying her away from one of the most challenging environments on Earth and back to the relative safety of the forward operating base. The debriefing of the mission took place immediately upon return to Chapman, with Colonel Mitchell personally conducting the after-action review. The successful engagement at 2,347 yards represented a new record for military sniper operations and demonstrated capabilities that would influence tactics and equipment development for years to come. More importantly, the elimination of the high-value target disrupted enemy operations throughout the region and provided significant intelligence value. Sarah's achievement quickly became known throughout the military special operations community, though the specific details remained highly classified. Her M24 rifle had earned its place in military history, having consistently delivered exceptional performance under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The combination of Sarah's natural abilities, extensive training, and exceptional equipment had created a capability that existed at the very limits of human and technological performance. The psychological impact of taking a life at such an extreme range was complex for Sarah to process. While she understood the strategic importance of her mission and felt pride in her technical achievement, the reality of killing another human being from nearly a mile and a half away created philosophical questions that would require time and reflection to fully address. The distance involved seemed to blur the line between warfare and something approaching divine intervention. As word of Sarah's achievement spread through classified channels, she began receiving attention from the highest levels of military leadership. The capabilities she had demonstrated were so exceptional that they opened up entirely new possibilities for special operations missions. Senior commanders began considering assignments that would have been impossible without a sniper of her extraordinary abilities, potentially changing the nature of how certain operations were conducted. The remaining months of Sarah's deployment would bring additional challenges and opportunities to demonstrate her exceptional skills, but the shot at 2,347 yards had already established her as one of the most capable snipers in military history. Her M24 rifle, now legendary within special operations circles, had become a symbol of what was possible when exceptional human ability combined with advanced technology and proper training. The young woman from Montana had achieved something that would influence military operations and training for generations to come. The knock on Colonel Robert Hayes's office door came at precisely 0800 hours on a crisp October morning at Joint Special Operations Command Headquarters in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 3 months had passed since Sarah Martinez had returned from her deployment to Afghanistan, and her legendary status within the special operations community had only grown during that time. The 2,347-yard shot that eliminated a high-value target had become the subject of classified briefings and tactical studies throughout the military, but now something even more significant was about to unfold. Colonel Hayes looked up from his morning intelligence briefings as his aide announced the arrival of a visitor whose presence commanded immediate attention. General Patricia Williamson, a 3-star general who served as Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command, entered the office with the bearing of an officer who had spent her entire career breaking barriers and exceeding expectations. Behind her walked a figure that made Hayes's breath catch in his throat, Sergeant First Class Sarah Martinez, carrying her legendary M24 rifle in a protective case. The general wasted no time with pleasantries as she took a seat across from Hayes's desk, her expression conveying the gravity of whatever situation had brought her to his office. Sarah remained standing at attention, her familiar calm demeanor unchanged despite the obvious importance of the meeting. Hayes had worked with both officers before, but he had never seen them together, and something about their combined presence suggested that extraordinary events were about to unfold. General Williamson began by explaining that Sarah's exceptional performance in Afghanistan had attracted attention from the highest levels of government, including intelligence agencies and military commanders who were dealing with threats that required capabilities beyond those of conventional forces. The success of her extreme long-range engagement had demonstrated possibilities that were reshaping how certain types of operations were being planned and executed. More importantly, it had revealed that Sarah possessed abilities that were virtually unique within the entire military establishment. The general continued by describing a developing situation that would test Sarah's skills in ways that even her Afghan deployment had not. Intelligence sources had identified a critical threat that required immediate attention, but the circumstances surrounding the target made conventional military approaches impossible. The location, timing, and political sensitivities involved created a scenario that could only be addressed by someone with Sarah's extraordinary capabilities. Hayes listened with growing amazement as General Williamson outlined the parameters of the proposed operation. The target was located in a region where American military forces could not operate openly, requiring an approach that maintained complete deniability. The engagement range would exceed even Sarah's record-setting shot in Afghanistan, pushing beyond the theoretical limits of her equipment and requiring innovations in tactics and technology. Most challenging of all, the window of opportunity was extremely narrow, allowing for only a single attempt at success. Sarah remained silent throughout the briefing, but Hayes could see her processing every detail with the focused concentration that had characterized her throughout her career. The challenges being described would have overwhelmed most special operations personnel, but Sarah's expression showed interest rather than apprehension. The ultimate test of her abilities was being offered, and her response would determine whether the mission proceeded. When General Williamson finished her briefing, she turned directly to Sarah and asked a single question that would change the course of military history. "Sergeant Martinez, where did you get that rifle?" The question seemed simple, but Hayes understood immediately that it carried significance far beyond its apparent meaning. The general wasn't asking about the weapon's technical specifications or procurement history, she was asking about the legendary capabilities that had made it famous throughout the special operations community. Sarah's response was characteristically direct and honest. She explained that the M24 had been issued to her during advanced marksmanship training at Fort Benning, but that its reputation had been earned through countless hours of practice, numerous combat engagements, and the development of an almost telepathic connection between shooter and weapon. The rifle itself was standard military equipment. What made it legendary was the combination of exceptional human ability, intensive training, and combat experience that had been invested in it. General Williamson nodded slowly as Sarah spoke, recognizing that the young sergeant understood the deeper significance of her question. The rifle had become famous not because of any inherent superiority, but because it had been wielded by someone whose natural abilities had been developed to their absolute maximum potential. The Deadeye mark that other snipers spoke about wasn't a physical characteristic of the weapon, it was the result of human excellence applied to a specific tool over thousands of repetitions. The conversation that followed revealed the true purpose of the meeting and the extraordinary nature of the mission being proposed. Intelligence sources had located a target whose elimination would significantly impact terrorist operations worldwide, but the individual was located in a position that could only be engaged from an extreme range under conditions that pushed beyond the limits of current military capabilities. The shot would have to be made from a distance exceeding 2,800 yards, in an environment with challenging weather conditions, and with no possibility for a second attempt. The technical challenges involved in such a shot were staggering even by Sarah's standards. The bullet drop at 2,800 yards would exceed 600 inches, requiring scope adjustments that pushed beyond the design limits of standard equipment. Wind effects at that range could cause deviation measured in yards rather than inches, making precise environmental analysis crucial for success. The extreme distance would also require ammunition specially developed for such applications, with ballistic characteristics unlike anything currently available. Sarah listened to these details with the same calm focus she had demonstrated throughout her career, asking technical questions that revealed her deep understanding of the physics involved in extreme long-range shooting. Her questions impressed both General Williamson and Colonel Hayes, demonstrating that she grasped not only the challenges involved but also the potential solutions. When asked if she believed the shot was possible, Sarah's response was immediate: with proper preparation and the right conditions, she could make it. The planning phase for the operation required 6 weeks of intensive preparation that brought together some of the most advanced technical expertise available to the military. Ballistics engineers worked to develop ammunition specifically designed for the extreme range requirements, while optics specialists created scope systems that could function effectively at distances never before attempted. Environmental analysts studied weather patterns and atmospheric conditions at the target location, creating predictive models that would be essential for mission success. Sarah's role in the planning process was central to every aspect of the operation. Her practical experience with extreme long-range shooting provided insights that couldn't be gained from theoretical calculations alone. She worked directly with engineers and scientists to develop equipment modifications that would maximize her chances of success, while also identifying potential problems that hadn't been considered by purely technical analyses. The rifle modifications required for the mission transformed Sarah's familiar M24 into something approaching a custom research instrument. The standard barrel was replaced with a heavier version designed to maintain accuracy at extreme range, while the stock was adjusted to provide perfect fit for Sarah's shooting position. The trigger system was rebuilt to provide the precise response characteristics she needed, and the scope was upgraded to an experimental system that pushed the boundaries of optical technology. Ammunition development proved to be one of the most challenging aspects of preparation, as no existing rounds were designed for the extreme range requirements of the mission. Military contractors worked around the clock to develop projectiles that could maintain stability and accuracy over a flight path exceeding half a mile. Each round was individually crafted and tested, with only the most perfect examples selected for the actual mission. The training program developed for Sarah was unlike anything previously conducted in military sniper programs. She worked with ballistics experts to refine her understanding of the complex physics involved in extreme long-range shooting, while also practicing with prototype equipment under conditions that simulated the actual mission environment. Weather specialists taught her to read atmospheric conditions with unprecedented precision, as minor miscalculations could result in complete mission failure. Physical conditioning took on new importance as the mission approached, with Sarah's training focusing on the specific demands she would face during the operation. The shooting position would require maintaining perfect stillness for extended periods at high altitude, while environmental conditions would test her endurance and concentration. Every aspect of her preparation was designed to maximize her performance during the crucial moments when the shot would be fired. The psychological preparation was equally intensive, as Sarah worked with military psychologists to develop mental strategies for dealing with the pressure of such an important mission. The knowledge that her shot could affect international security and potentially save countless lives created stress levels that exceeded anything she had experienced during combat operations. Techniques for maintaining focus and controlling anxiety were practiced repeatedly until they became automatic responses. As the mission date approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young woman who had learned to shoot tin cans behind her grandfather's ranch had evolved into someone whose abilities were being employed at the highest levels of national security. The M24 rifle that had seemed so foreign during her first days at Fort Benning had become an extension of her will, capable of reaching out and affecting events at distances that seemed almost supernatural. The final briefing took place in a secure facility where only the most essential personnel were present. The target had been confirmed to be in position, whether conditions were within acceptable parameters, and all technical preparations had been completed. Sarah would be inserted by helicopter at a location over 50 miles from the target, then moved to a shooting position that offered clear lines of sight while maintaining complete concealment from enemy observation. The helicopter flight to the insertion point took Sarah over terrain that was both beautiful and forbidding, with mountain peaks and deep valleys stretching to the horizon in all directions. The aircraft flew at extremely low altitude to avoid radar detection, requiring exceptional skill from the crew to navigate safely through the complex terrain. Sarah used the flight time for final mental preparations, visualizing the shot sequence and reviewing the environmental factors that would affect her bullet's trajectory. The insertion took place before dawn on a mountain ridge that rose nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, creating environmental conditions that pushed human performance to its absolute limits. The thin air made every breath inadequate, while the extreme cold threatened to affect both human performance and equipment function. Sarah and her small support team established their position with practiced efficiency, knowing that they had only a narrow window of opportunity to complete their mission. The shooting position offered perfect visibility across a valley where the target was located over 2,800 yards away. The distance was so great that Sarah could barely distinguish individual figures without the aid of her scope, making positive target identification extremely challenging. Environmental conditions were constantly changing, with wind patterns that shifted unpredictably and atmospheric effects that varied throughout the day. Sarah spent several hours making final adjustments to her equipment and calculations while observing the target area through her advanced optics system. The extreme range meant that even minor variations in environmental conditions could affect her bullet's trajectory significantly. Every factor that could influence the shot had to be measured and incorporated into her firing solution, creating a complex mathematical equation that existed at the very limits of possibility. When the target finally appeared in Sarah's scope, she had perhaps 90 seconds to complete all final preparations and fire before the opportunity would be lost forever. The pressure was unlike anything she had ever experienced, with the knowledge that her shot could affect international security and potentially prevent terrorist attacks that would claim innocent lives. Despite this enormous pressure, Sarah entered the calm, focused mental state that had characterized her best shooting throughout her career. The shot Sarah fired that day would never be officially acknowledged by the government, but its effects would be felt throughout the international intelligence community for years to come. The bullet traveled for over 4 seconds before reaching its target at a range that exceeded every previous record for military sniper operations. The successful engagement eliminated a threat that had been planning attacks against American interests and demonstrated capabilities that would influence military tactics for decades. The extraction from the shooting position was conducted immediately after the successful shot, with Sarah and her team moving quickly to avoid detection by hostile forces who would soon be searching the area. The helicopter pickup took place at a predetermined location, with the aircraft arriving precisely on schedule to carry the team to safety. As the aircraft climbed away from the mountain ridge, Sarah looked back at the position where she had just made history, knowing that her shot would be analyzed and discussed by military experts for generations. The debriefing that followed the mission was conducted at the highest levels of government, with officials from multiple agencies present to analyze the success and its implications for future operations. Sarah's achievement had demonstrated capabilities that opened up entirely new possibilities for special operations, potentially changing how certain types of threats would be addressed in the future. The combination of human excellence and advanced technology had created results that seemed almost impossible. Years later, when military historians would write about the evolution of special operations capabilities, Sarah's achievements would be recognized as a turning point in the development of precision warfare. Her M24 rifle, now retired and displayed in a classified facility, or the Deadeye mark of someone who had pushed human performance to its absolute limits. The young woman from Montana had not only served her country with distinction but had redefined what was possible when exceptional ability combined with advanced technology and unwavering dedication. The question, "Where did you get that rifle?" would become legendary within military circles, not because of the weapon itself, but because it represented the moment when human excellence was recognized and employed at the highest levels of national security. Sarah Martinez had proven that extraordinary individuals, when properly trained and equipped, could achieve results that changed the course of history. Her legacy would inspire future generations of military personnel to pursue excellence in service of their country, knowing that exceptional ability could make a difference when it mattered most.